Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining the working group meeting to further discuss the market formulation options that are being proposed for the day-ahead market enhancement initiative. My name is Christina Osborne. I work in stakeholder affairs. I'll be facilitating the meeting today. Really the objective of this meeting is to continue to review those options and really get your feedback. So this is a working group discussion. We do encourage you to ask questions and just provide comments. So anytime you have a question, feel free to raise your hand in the room. We will start with the questions in the room, and then we'll go to the phone lines. Again, for folks in the room, please use your microphones and introduce yourselves before asking a question, and also for the folks on the phone, if you have a question, you can raise your hand by pressing pound 2, and also start by introducing yourself. So the presentation was posted on Friday. It's available on the initiative web page. We're also recording the meeting today, and we'll make that recording available on that same page. That web page is located on the Stakeholder Processes page underneath the Stay Informed tab on the ISO website. This is the agenda. Megan Pogue is actually going to be presenting first. She's with our policy group. First, she's going to start by talking about the need for a day-ahead market redesign. She'll go into to talk about the policy alignment between the day-ahead market enhancement, RA enhancements, and extended day-ahead market initiative. Then she's going to talk about the market formulation options. We will break for lunch. After lunch, we have Bridget Clark, who was contracted by the policy team to do some data analysis, so she's going to kind of review her findings. And then finally, Dawn Trethaway, also from policy, is going to talk about the comparison of the market alternatives, and then I'll finish with the next steps. Up at the table here, we have Greg Cook from policy, and we also have George Angelides from technology, who will be here to support the team. So with that, I will turn it over to Megan.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Is everyone still waking up? You guys look a little tired. I guess it's the beginning of the week instead of the end of the week. So thank you for joining us today, those in the room and those on the phone. We are taking this opportunity to regroup and discuss our two market alternatives for the day-ahead market enhancements. Our team also spent a considerable amount of time reviewing the stakeholder comments we received after the last working group meeting, which was held in June. And based on the comments we received, we believe there was still some uncertainty about the direction we're proposing with both of our options, and in addition, quantifying and qualifying the need for this new product altogether. So that is why we have the presentation laid out the way we do. We'll start by explaining why we think this redesign is needed and merited from more of a qualitative perspective as opposed to a quantitative perspective. And then, as I had hinted at I think our prior MSC meeting, we've also done work internally to make sure we have alignment between our various initiatives that are moving forward right now, specifically day-ahead market enhancements, the extension of the day-ahead market to the EIM, and RA enhancements. So we have an overview of the correlation between those and want to reassure everyone that we have alignment between those, and our teams are working closely together to make sure we move forward in one direction. So with that, let's jump into it. So overall, we've been saying this from day one, but the day-ahead market enhancements, we believe, is addressing two things. One is it's being done for reliability needs. We know that the resource fleet is changing, that our operators are continuing to make more and more out-of-market actions to address potential reliability needs. And in addition to that, those out-of-market actions are creating inefficiencies in the market solution. So we believe the day-ahead market enhancements will address both the reliability needs our operators are facing, and in addition to that, create efficiencies by creating a new product within the market algorithm. So we have recognized, and Bridget will present later, that uncertainty across years has increased. We had presented some data in our last working group meetings, and it was just 1 year of data. What we did is expanded our data set from 2017 to 2019, and we have seen a trend in the increase of uncertainty. So we've taken some time to think about why that might be happening. And all said and done, I think it's common knowledge our resource fleet is changing. We're moving away from traditional generation. We're moving towards a renewable fleet to meet our RPS standards. And with that comes uncertainty. The sun isn't always shining, the clouds come and they go, and as uncertainty unfolds, we have to be able to meet those changes. So if we're looking historically at our gas generation fleet, our gas generators would know 5 years ago if they'd be running or not. If they had a day-ahead schedule, they know they would have to be running in real time. You could set up your gas appropriately. But let's assume you're a gas generator 5 years ago and you do not have a day-ahead schedule, but you anticipate you'll be needed in real time. You can line up your costs and set yourself up in the day-ahead time frame based on an anticipation of running in real time. Today, that doesn't exist. There's so much uncertainty that's grown on the system that if you're a traditional gas generator, you really have no certainty and know whether or not you will be needed in the real time. So how do you determine what those costs are to be available or not be available in the real-time market if needed and called upon? And that cost is what we can cover by creating a new day-ahead product, which we're now calling the Imbalance Reserve product. So all said and done, we know it's not even just gas, but there are costs with redispatching hydro or making hydro available in the real-time market so it can respond to changes. Same with storage and even same with imports. We'll talk about this a bit later, but imports have to set up transmission. They have to know whether they're going to need to purchase that firm transmission or not ahead of time. So there are costs with all sorts of resource types that we need to be able to incorporate into a co-optimized solution in the day-ahead market so we can balance that need for energy and capacity and set our fleet up in the day-ahead time frame. And this has changed dramatically from 5 years ago to today. Oh, there it is. Now I skipped too many. There we go. Yes. So I hinted on, and we've talked about this in the past, but what our operators are doing today to meet their reliability needs. And today they have two options. So during the day-ahead time frame, we'll clear the integrated forward market, clear bid and demand to cleared supply. And our operators can do what we formally call the Ruck net short adjustment. And all that's doing is the operators are going in and they're adjusting the forecast to try to commit additional capacity to meet our forecasted needs. Informally, our operators call this a bias. And it's not necessarily efficient because it's not allowing us to do that trade-off between energy and capacity. In addition to that, they have the option to exceptionally dispatch. And both of these processes are not necessarily the most efficient way to do that co-optimization. So we know our operators need to address uncertainty. They're doing that with the bias and with the ED. But this process really is blunt and inefficient. Inefficient meaning it's not co-optimized in the market solution. Another thing we've talked about is the fact that the Ruck adjustment, the forecast adjustment, it may just incrementally increase capacity that's available on a generator that's already online as opposed to committing an additional generator. So that's that balance between needing energy and capacity, which we could solve or resolve by introducing a new product for capacity and balancing that as a trade-off with energy. And we believe, all said and done, that we can price this at the marginal cost so we're more efficiently recognizing that trade-off and being able to schedule capacity and energy at the same time through a co-optimized solution. Sure, go ahead, Mike.
This is Mike Castellano, Energy Division of the CPUC. So you're saying that you need the day-ahead market enhancements to help compensate or to sort of remove the need to make all these operator adjustments. But most, I didn't have time to look at the data a whole lot, but from looking at the graph that you have later in the presentation yesterday, it looked like the operator adjustments generally pull farther away from FMM net load. And I forget what you guys call it, but your sort of forecast net load versus the adjusted forecast net load.
Right.
The forecast is closer than the adjusted. So so what that says to me is the operators, for the most part, didn't necessarily need to make those adjustments. So that doesn't really fit with why we need this product then.
So I see what you're saying, but I think you have to go into the mind of the operator. When the operator's doing this adjusted forecast, they're not necessarily just trying to ink capacity that's from generation that's already on the system. More often than not, they're wanting to get an additional generator committed. And some of the data we've published in the price performance analysis report has shown that on these days that we're doing these really heavy biases, we're not actually getting additional commitment of generation, so we're not effectively balancing that trade-off between energy and capacity. So more often than not, what we are seeing is our operators are over-biasing, which is not an efficient solution either. If we can determine the needs at once without having to have the operators go in and manually do this process, but do it consistently through a market solution, you'll have a more efficient product and solution.
Okay, I mean, I haven't seen anything in any of the formulations that you guys have given that guarantees more commitment.
Right, and I think that's an excellent point. I don't think we are trying to do more commitment, right? We're trying to say that the operators, that's what they're using as their tool right now to have flexibility. They don't necessarily have flexibility, so their way of having flexibility is trying to get another generator committed so they can move up or down. But what this new product would do is say it's more efficient and cheaper for me to have generator X scheduled at 100 megawatts with flexibility down or up, and then also schedule generator 2 at 200 megawatts with flexibility up or down, as opposed to schedule just one generator at a Pmax of 300. So it might determine that Pmax of 300 for the energy of one generator by itself is the most efficient solution, but it could also recognize the flexibility in needing to move up or down could require the commitment of 2 generators. It's balancing out those costs.
Okay, I guess now it sounds like you don't really need to make any changes, but maybe I'm just not hearing it right. I don't know.
Any other questions in the room?
Yes, this is Tayu from Tommy Energy Solutions. Based on your opinion, you said basically you try to have more generators come online, but for the reserve up, my question is, have you ever done any production simulation to show you can improve the situation of operators, buyers, you know?
So biasing is a very imperfect tool. It's very blunt and it's often overdone. So we know operators are biasing because there's potential for uncertainty to materialize. So all we're saying, I should not have said that we're trying to get more generation online. That's not the goal. The goal is to have the appropriate amount of generation committed and energy scheduled at a specific value that provides you flexibility up and down, because we don't know in real time where we're going to land. And if you don't have that flexibility to move up or down based on what's committed in the day-ahead market, that can lead to more operator out-of-market actions when you get into real time. And to answer the second half of your question, we have not done any simulation of this yet. We have solvers that explain how the co-optimization would work, but we have not done a simulation.
Yeah, basically, you just based on your theoretical analysis, say, add up this like imbalance and reserve up capacity requirement, you may improve the situation of operators, buyers on the like load forecast. But there is no like proof of data, I mean, to prove to show this result.
Well, this is Greg Cook, and I think, the point we're trying to add here is that the day-ahead market today currently doesn't position resources to meet those uncertainty needs that we're having between the day-ahead and the real-time market. We have data showing later that shows that there's a fair amount of uncertainty today. It's been increasing over time. We're seeing an increasing trend. It'll continue to get bigger as we have more uncertainty in the load with behind-the-meter rooftop solar, and more uncertainty of the generation fleet as well as it becomes more filled with renewable resources. So there's clearly more uncertainty coming in the market. It's hard to forecast exactly what's going to happen in real time in the day-ahead time frame. So we're having to the operators have to ensure that they have resources positioned so that they can handle that uncertainty when we get to real time. The day-ahead market doesn't do that today. This is what we're trying to do with this new product, is ensure that we have the resources positioned so that the operators can meet that uncertainty, whether it's going to be a higher load or a lower load when we get into real time. Today, I think what Megan's trying to say is we do that through these very blunt instruments, which is out-of-market operator actions, such as biasing the Ruck net load forecast, doing exceptional dispatches, that sort of thing. But again, that's not ensuring that they have that need either. It's just a way to trying to get more resources online so that they do have potentially more upward capability, but they may not have the downward capability out of that. So we have no assurance that those needs are even going to be met. So this is really being done primarily for a reliability need that we need going forward as the fleet's changing over.
And to follow up on that really quickly, and I think this gets to Mike's point, our operators anticipate worst-case scenario, right? If they saw 2,000 megawatts of uncertainty yesterday, you better bet they're going to be prepped for 2,000 megawatts of uncertainty today and tomorrow. In reality, that might not materialize, but what that does end up doing is resulting in a larger bias than may be necessary. So the bias can actually position the fleet, so you're in an oversupply condition, which is not necessarily needed. This product creates that flexibility to move up or down economically, and it's all priced through the market.
Yeah, I agree that the uncertainty, sure, you need to address it in the day-ahead market. But in this sense, if you add this elements into the day-ahead market, do you mean in the future, in the RTPD, the operator won't put any buyers anymore?
Good distinction. So my understanding of how I envision this rolling out is when we do the day-ahead market enhancements and we have the new product, there will no longer be the need to bias in the day-ahead market like we know it today. The imbalance reserve product is effectively making up for the need for the operator to bias. They will still have to ED occasionally if needed, hit that like really abnormal P99 event. But the biasing in the day ahead will really no longer be needed on a regular basis. In RTPD, the reason for biasing is a little bit different, right? This new product is setting us up to move from the day ahead to RTPD or the 15-minute market. But then from the 15-minute market, RTPD, to the 5-minute market, RTD, the real-time dispatch, there will still be the need to drive the car. You still got to make those little adjustments to make sure you're staying in the lane. But in reality, this new product is at least getting us in the right lane, right? And then we got to navigate once we're in there. So there will still be some level of operator forecast adjustments in the real-time market, but because we're positioned more appropriately, the need for that should be minimized.
This is Mike Castellano with CPUC Energy Division again. So I understand that the operators are looking at worst-case scenarios, but what doesn't make sense to me now is that we're going to have this market product that somehow is going to alleviate the need for them to think about worst-case scenarios, which then says to me that it's either going to be still procuring more than we need to most of the time, or else somehow they're just going to, I mean, if you have 2,000 megawatts of uncertainty with the imbalance reserve product one day, and the next day the requirement is only for 1,000, I have trouble believing that the operators aren't going to be concerned about that and aren't going to want to do something about that.
Yeah, and it's a balance, right? I mean, we will talk about it. Bridget's data will show the trend of the different amounts of uncertainty that materialize different percentage of the time. And if we buy too much of this, it is going to be too expensive and not needed. But we also are trying to hit our tail events. We're trying to set our operators up so we remove those out-of-market actions and are able to efficiently get them into the market solution. So there's a balance there, and we're trying to achieve and strike that balance between reliability for the operators and efficiency out of a market solution. Sounds like we have a call on the phone. Operator, can you open the line?
Yep, sure thing. First question in the queue.
Hi, good morning. It's Mark Holman with PowerX. I had a few thoughts on this, and I really appreciate your slides here in the opening section about describing this. And I think that maybe there's a little bit different way to look at this that might help, because I hear the comments about operator adjustments not necessarily bringing you closer to the FMM energy solution. And I think you're touching on it, Megan, with the idea that this is really about having enough balancing reserves. It's not about operators making adjustments to say, hey, I'm going to adjust the load so that I get the load more accurate to the energy solution. It's about creating headroom in either the INC or DEC direction to ensure that they have enough balancing reserves to deal with the potential outcomes, which are many, inside real time. And so another way to think about this is if we think about what the CAISO procures today, you procure spinning reserve, non-spinning reserve, and regulation up and down. Spinning and non-spinning reserve are only for contingency events. Reg up and reg down is generally for within 5-minute variations, including lead time after the RTD dispatch or the 5-minute dispatch. And I think the gap that exists that you're addressing here is that there is uncertainty between the day-ahead and real-time market, as well as within our variation, that goes beyond regulating reserves. Regulating reserves are only covering that within 5-minute and plus lead time piece. And I think another concept to think about is if you back up 10 years ago, this was not a challenge. You didn't need a real-time flexible ramping product, and you didn't need a day-ahead imbalance product to cover these additional balancing reserves because the variation on the system was limited to load. There wasn't a lot of errors on the system, so most of the variations were much smaller. The uncertainty was much smaller because it was only on the demand side, not the demand and supply side. And by having a day-ahead energy solution, there was generally enough INC and DEC reserves, for lack of a better description, lying around to meet that balancing reserve need. You didn't have to go out and actually acquire flexible capacity beyond regulating reserve to deal with that uncertainty between day-ahead and real-time and the variations within the hour. And what has happened is as those variations have gone up and the amount of thermals on the systems declines, simply having enough lying around and having that be enough is no longer sufficient. So in comes the real-time flexible ramping product. Now we're getting to a point where the day-ahead to real-time uncertainty is so great that we can't just wait until real-time to acquire that through the flexible ramping product. It needs to actually be committed day-ahead. And where we're seeing that happen, unfortunately, is through what we think is 3 different tools. There's the Ruck net short, or the load adjustment in the Ruck process that's trying to commit additional units, or a better description is trying to ensure there's enough upward or ideally downward headroom. We have exceptional dispatch, which is calling for energy to try to displace other resources to create headroom. And then we have load biasing in real time, including in the HASS process, that is bringing in energy to try to create headroom. And I think there are numerous harmful consequences, including to California load, with out-of-market tools to achieve that headroom. One example is just imagine if you purchased your spin and non-spin, not in the day-ahead market, not even in the real-time market, but tried to use exceptional dispatch and load biasing to try to create enough spin and non-spin on the system. It would be highly inefficient. The resources being committed for spin and non-spin would not be the optimal ones, and you'd run the risk of over-procuring too much spin or non-spin and also the risk of not having enough. And so I think the reality is this is a balancing reserve product that's long been needed, but it's being addressed through out-of-market actions that are inefficient. And by acquiring this through the market solution, you'll actually get a lower total production cost, and you'll prevent some of the harmful consequences that we're seeing in your market, including some of the things we're seeing happen with virtual bids that we'll talk about later that happens as a result of out-of-market actions. So again, when we think about these adjustments, we shouldn't be talking about, hey, were these adjustments made? Did they bring us closer to the energy solution? We don't look at spin and non-spin and say, hey, if we never deployed them, what a waste it was to commit them. We recognize that we needed to have that capacity unloaded to deal with the uncertainty of forced outages. I think when we examine the data later today, we really need to think about that just because we commit additional capacity or headroom up or down that doesn't get used, that doesn't make it inefficient. That means that that headroom was set aside to cover a variety of scenarios that may not have materialized, but it was still necessary to have that flexible reserves on the system. And it's not inefficient just because it doesn't get deployed. And so I know I said a lot there, but I really appreciate what you've got here in the slides because I think it really is about having the right amount of reserves that now need to be committed day ahead.
Thank you, Mark. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, this is Mike Castellano again. So, Mark, you brought up an interesting point that you say that the ISO is not able to procure the kind of flexibility they need through the real-time flexible ramping product. So I haven't looked at prices for that in a while, but the last time I looked, they were not hitting the penalty parameter or really getting all that high on a regular basis. Has that changed to your knowledge? Or
what I was saying,
can anybody tell me?
Sorry, Mike, what I was saying was something a little bit different. What I'm saying is that the operators are not able to go into the hour before the flexible ramping product is procured with enough comfort, absent procuring other reserves through load biasing and exceptional dispatch and Ruck net short, that they're confident that they're going to be able to meet the actual real-time load, including on a day-ahead basis. So the flexible ramping product is a way to set aside headroom in real time, but with real-time lead times. So I think what we're seeing is that this exceptional dispatch, the systemic load biasing, and even the Ruck net short is a way to set headroom aside ahead of real time. And so the reason you wouldn't expect to see it hitting penalty prices because they're creating those reserves before you ever get to the procurement of the flexible ramping product through the 1,000 megawatts plus of average load biasing in the evening peak, through the exceptional dispatches that we see are sizable, and through the Ruck net short we see are sizable. And I think as we walk through the dialogue on this, I think what we'll find is that it's much more efficient and lower total production cost to actually procure this as an explicit product if we get it right, rather than having them buy it day ahead and ahead of real time to set themselves up to have that headroom, which is what we're seeing happen now in very large volumes.
Okay, so one very important thing you said right there, Mark, is the if we get it right. So let's remember that if we don't get this right, then we still have no idea if we're making an improvement or getting the right amount of reserves or, at a reasonable cost. But another thing that I'm hearing here that I'm curious about is it sounds like one of the issues we have is we designed the flexible ramping product to do something. It's not really doing everything we need. So, I don't understand how trying to resolve the certainty in day ahead is really that much better.
I'm going to pause there just briefly because we actually have a slide that specifically covers why we don't think the real-time flexible ramping product is meeting the needs of the imbalance reserves. And it does get to Mark's point earlier, but I have that in 2 slides.
Okay, this still doesn't lead me to the conclusion that we have to do something in day ahead because we still don't have as much information in day ahead as we do in real time. So
you're right, and that's, I think the whole point is we don't have the information. If we did, actually, Perry and I have been talking about this. If we knew in the day ahead exactly where FMM was going to come in, we'd be dandy. We could set our position up. We could say we just need imbalance reserves up. We know we're at 38,000 in the day ahead, and we're going to be at 40,000 in FMM. So let's buy 2,000 megawatts of this new product just in the upward direction that'll meet our needs. But we don't know. We have no way of knowing in the day ahead where we're going to be set up. So the best we can do is efficiently procure product to be able to meet the uncertainty up or down that we think might materialize. Because our only tools to do that today, this is the qualitative need, right, are to do that out of market. And out of market is no longer cutting it. The uncertainty is increasing. This problem is getting worse. Our operators are taking more and more out of market actions. That's their job right now. Their job is to position the fleet so they meet what they think is going to happen. But if we can do that within the market, that's a better solution than continuing and more dramatically to do it out of the market.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, but saying that we have to do it day ahead still doesn't necessarily apply. The reason I bring up the difference between day ahead and real time is if we could do it, say, 4 hours ahead in real time instead of 15 minutes ahead or whatever, 37 minutes ahead that it's done now, we would have more information than we do in day ahead. And we would, 4 hours, you can start a lot more resources than you can in the current real-time look ahead.
I hear that, and I agree with that point. Sure. Then that gets back to what type of unit you're going to be able to get, though. So, there are costs that we have to know in the day-ahead time frame in order to be available for the real-time market to use. Imports are a good example. We've been focusing more on long start, but imports still have to procure transmission. There's tagging requirements that have to be set up. So we limit our resource fleet to be available in real time, even if we're looking 4 hours out, which is why we think extending this and setting yourself up in the day-ahead time frame will allow these different resource types to reflect the cost it would be for them to be available into the real-time.
Megan, very concisely on that point. Why not buy spin or non-spin 4 hours ahead instead of day ahead? We buy spin and non-spin day ahead because it allows us to have the maximum choice of resources to position with spin and non-spin. The closer you go to real time, the smaller the pool, because you'll have loaded up resources with energy in the day ahead market, or you won't have bought gas, or you won't have committed imports, and your pool gets much smaller. We buy spin and non-spin, even though we don't need it until real time when we actually have a contingency event. We buy it day ahead because it gives you the most efficient solution to commit resources. It's the same thing here. Now, I recognize that uncertainty goes down as we get closer, but your pool will shrink dramatically. You'll end up loading some of the resources that are best capable of providing imbalance reserves with energy or not committing them and losing entirely.
To back that up, Dawn and I actually were having a good conversation yesterday and saying, what happens if we don't procure this new product in the day ahead? Let's assume we just stick with where we're at, and then we have this worst case scenario day. We saw uncertainty in really high numbers, and let's assume we need to move up. Our day ahead comes in short, and we need 5,000 megawatts in real time. And our resource fleet has changed. It's hot everywhere else. There's no more imports. The firm transmission is used. We're transmission constrained, and real-time gas generators aren't able to buy gas. We get to the point where this problem continues to worsen with time, which is the trend we're seeing from our data analysis so far. We could get to the point where we try to ED, and we don't even have any generation to ED. And so the way we can guarantee that we're setting ourselves up for success in the real-time market is by creating that resource fleet and procuring that in the day-ahead time frame. So we have flexibility and options, and we're doing this efficiently through a market product from the day ahead to meet those changes and that potential worst-case scenario in real time.
So I know we have a couple questions on the phone, but go ahead, and then we'll go to the phone lines.
This is Michael Cullen with Environmental Defense Fund. I agree a lot with that hypothetical example that you set up, so thank you so much for that. The one observation I would make is I don't think you're going to see generators actually making the build, no build decision based off of the revenue stream from this new product. I just don't think it's going to sustain. What I do think could happen is whether or not they decide to be able to dispatch or decide to be able to turn on and ramp on for the next day. And I think that's what we should be aiming for.
Great distinction. I agree.
And so it sounds like we're saying the same thing, but I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because there would be a cost to turn on, right? There are startup costs, but there's also costs just to be available to ramp or to move your output. And we want to take those costs and put them into the market so we get a solution and a product that's reflecting those costs. So if it's expensive for you to ramp in real time and you have to buy extra gas to be able to ramp, let's set you up and make sure you're paid, and if you're going to be dispatched, that those costs are covered within the market solution.
Will, we'll go to the first question on the phone, please. Caller, go ahead.
Morning.
Will, are you out there?
Hello?
Sorry, go ahead and repeat your name.
This is Kong Wen from Puget Sound. I do have a question on the timing of the product. So day-ahead market is really set up 14 hours before the market day. And what I'm seeing in the slide is that the exceptional dispatch that you're showing, it tends to go closer to real time. It doesn't have to happen well ahead of time of the market day, like 14 hours. So I wonder, I share the same concern with other participants about setting up the headroom or commit more units well ahead of time, knowing that when you get closer to real time, things can change, and it can change dramatically. So I wonder if if we are going to the extreme here, because the day-ahead market is a lot of things in the day-ahead market you forecast may not materialize in real time. So shouldn't we wait closer to real time to procure this product instead of in the day-ahead time frame? So that is something I like to put on the table. And I don't know how to answer the question.
Thank you.
To be 14 hours ahead.
So I think I heard two pieces of your question. The first was in relation to the exceptional dispatches that occur and the timing in which those occur. And you are correct. Sometimes we wait until real-time to ED because we ED based on the needs and when it's needed and based on the potential startup time of the resource. But to answer your second question, you're right. Sometimes uncertainty doesn't materialize, but that's why we've done this data analysis. We've heard from our operators for years that it's getting worse. Real-time's coming in off of our load forecast. It's become harder to forecast. We have so much rooftop solar, especially within the state of California now. So we've seen things change. Our operators are feeling things change, but we did need to back that up, and that's why we've done this data analysis. So the data analysis fully supports that the amount of uncertainty that is actually showing up. This is real historical data. These aren't numbers we fabricated or estimated. This is real uncertainty that we've seen on the system in the past 2 years and a quarter. So that will be the fun we get to have after lunch. But if we did not see uncertainty, if this wasn't a problem our operators were feeling, and if this wasn't a problem our data supported, you're right. We wouldn't be looking at a day-ahead product because it wouldn't be needed. But we have the qualitative and the quantitative need, which we believe we're supporting here as why a justification for this day-ahead market redesign.
So I think just in the interest of time, we're going to keep going through this section, and then we'll take questions after she's done.
So the next piece, we received some questions that are related to our discussion today. So the first question was, well, you have resource adequacy. Why wouldn't you just continue to use resource adequacy to meet your potential imbalance needs? And the second question was about the real-time flexible ramping product and why real-time flexible ramping product should or should not just be used to meet the uncertainty needs that may materialize. So I'm going to talk about RA first, then we'll get to the real-time flex ramp product, and then we'll continue this RA discussion when we talk about our policy vision for the next few years. So things have changed, and the way resource adequacy works today is it creates a real-time day-ahead and a real-time must-offer obligation. And the costs to be available for that real-time must-offer are actually integrated into the contracts for the resource adequacy when that's determined a year ahead of time. What we propose to do is continue to allow the day-ahead market to position your fleet appropriately and then efficiently determine what your real-time needs are and use this new product to set the real-time must-offer obligation. So we'll allow our RA fleet to have the day-ahead must-offer obligation, and those needs and the RA requirements will be set through the process they are today, and we have our RA team supporting us here. We're working with them, and they'll continue to use the RA enhancements to make sure those requirements are appropriately determined. So your RA fleet will come into the day-ahead market, and you'll get your commitment through the day-ahead market, and the result of the day-ahead market will be this new imbalance reserve product, which will provide the real-time must-offer obligation, as opposed to continuing to have the RA resources provide a real-time must-offer. And we think this will allow us to effectively manage the RA fleet and procure the appropriate amount of this product based on the needs for that day and based on historical uncertainty and other factors which we'll talk about this afternoon. And we do believe the imbalance reserve product will allow us to cover the cost of making this capacity available both in the upward and the downward direction. Currently, this is embedded in the contracts for RA, and we think we can move that into the imbalance reserve bids. We also received questions about the real-time flexible ramping product and why the real-time flexible ramping product shouldn't be enhanced in order to meet these needs. We want to reinforce real-time flexible ramping product and the day-ahead imbalance reserve product are two very separate, different products that are meeting two separate needs. So one really key takeaway, and Mark Holman mentioned this earlier, but we have a resource fleet and resources that are only available if we commit them in the day-ahead time frame. Our real-time flexible ramping product is only going to pick up resources that are economically bid into the real-time market. So if we know that our real-time market is not able to commit long start resources, you don't know that even your short start resources have gas lined up to meet potential dispatch needs in real time, and you have imports that may or may not be able to procure transmission, your real-time flexible ramping product is potentially limited by all of those types of resources. So it's therefore not efficient to only rely on the real-time flexible ramping product to meet these major uncertainty changes that we've seen over the past years. So we've got a summary here of the difference of these two. I'm going to hit on a couple of the major notes between imbalance reserve. My microphone's screaming at me. It wants to be done with this section. Okay, hopefully I don't make any more weird noises. No promises. So we've got the difference between the day-ahead imbalance reserves and the real-time flexible ramping product. Imbalance reserves are hourly, but they are 15-minute dispatchable, so we'll use a 15-minute constraint to make sure they can move within each 15-minute interval. They're biddable. That's a huge difference. Real-time flexible ramping product is not biddable. You bid in for energy, and you can receive a real-time flexible ramping product award. So through the imbalance reserve, you're actually able to set your costs that you have for that resource type to be available in the real-time market to be dispatched up or to be dispatched down. Very different than the real-time flexible ramping product. Our imbalance reserve product is going to be able to cover granularity and uncertainty. In comparison, the real-time flexible ramping product is just covering uncertainty within the real-time market time frame. And if you even take a step back and let's look at the potential changes, we've talked about the fact that between day-ahead and real-time, there is significantly greater uncertainty that could materialize than there would be between your 15-minute market and your 5-minute market. So the imbalance reserve needs to be able to cover a wider spread than just the real-time flexible ramping product. This next bullet talking about the co-optimization and simultaneous settlement. It's a really important factor. If you think about the way the day-ahead market runs and optimizes, it's looking over all 24 hours. It's able to see your morning peak, the belly of the duck, and the evening peak, and schedule your resources based on characteristics of that resource type to meet all of the needs across the day. In comparison, real-time flexible ramping product is only looking out as far as the real-time market has a lookout. So maybe we're committing something in the morning to meet the morning peak, and then that unit shuts off over the belly of the duck, and then that generator is no longer available to meet your uncertainty real-time market needs in the evening peak. So that is a benefit of having a ramping product in the day-ahead market and setting it up with the vision of all 24 hours as opposed to just your real-time market timeline. We are able, there is no forecasted movement in the imbalance reserve product. In comparison, our real-time flexible ramping product, we have to settle for forecasted movement because of the movement from the advisory schedule becoming binding to make sure we're appropriately compensating the resource for opportunity costs. That's not a problem in the day-ahead market because, again, we're settling all intervals at one time. And finally, this last bullet, our potential for stepped relaxation parameters. Let's think about how real-time flexible ramping product actually works first. Real-time flexible ramping product, we're really taking a gamble in real-time market to determine, do we want to hold this resource back for uncertainty that may materialize, or do we actually want to convert that to energy and use it now? We have to make that gamble. In the day-ahead market, when we're setting up, you don't have to make that gamble. You can co-optimize. You can say, I want this much energy and this much capacity and make that decision all at once. And we could use relaxed or stepped constraints. So if we need to get a certain amount of the product, we can do that at a relaxation parameter. So very different, and because they're so different, there's no settlement between them. They're two separate products. We will have no deviation settlement. That's actually why we have moved away from the name day-ahead flexible ramping product, because it is so different and meets a different need than the real-time flexible ramping product. And I think George is going to kill us if we change the name again, right, George? So we're sticking with imbalance reserves for now. So with that, any questions? This is my last slide. We can talk about flexible ramping products and the difference between imbalance reserves, or we can talk about any of these slides before we move on. Go ahead, Dan.
Hey, Megan, Dan Williams from Customized Energy Solutions. So while the imbalance reserve product isn't settling against the real-time flexible ramping product, should we expect that the performance of the FRP will improve having the IRP in front of it versus having out-of-market activity in front of it? Does that question make sense?
Yes, that does make sense. Good question. I think actually, so our imbalance reserves is setting us from day ahead to FMM. Your real-time flexible ramping product is still moving you from FMM to RTD. So there's still a need for both products. But I think one of the major factors, and it's not a focus of today's presentation, but we are working on the deliverability of the flexible ramping product, and we're brainstorming simple ideas and very complex ideas. And we need that for the imbalance reserve product to make sure it's deliverable where you need it. But in addition to that, we'd like to use whatever we come up with for the day-ahead product and use that same deliverability method for the real-time flexible ramping product, which should make it more usable for our operators. So I see the deliverability as the element that will make real-time flexible ramping products more efficient than it is today. But I do not necessarily see the imbalance reserves reducing the need for the real-time flexible ramping product. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I also was kind of extending to think that maybe one of the reasons that the real-time FRP is not maybe producing the prices that some would like would be that the out-of-market activity happening in front of it is resulting in kind of the oversupply conditions by the time you get to real-time where the FRP is taking over and therefore it's not binding and those sorts of things. That I was thinking that the imbalance reserve product would get you a more accurate solution in advance of the FRP taking over in that time horizon, which would set the system up more accurately as you move into the FRP horizon.
It could. I mean, taking all of these out-of-market biasing and ED actions is going to create a more efficient solution across markets, which I think would get to the main point.
Thanks.
Will, do we have any questions in the queue?
Yes, we currently have one in the question queue.
Yes, good morning. Josh Arnold from PG&E. Thank you, first off, very much for putting these slides together. I haven't had a chance yet to go through the data in the last slide. I'm very looking forward to that for the afternoon. But I had a couple questions in advance of the conversation that I wanted to ask. The first question is, last fall, we introduced the Operator Bias for Uncertainty Initiative, for the Imbalance Conformance Initiative. I understand that you've looked at data for 2017 to 2019, but we did just make a change in the system to try to address this operator bias and the ineffectiveness or inefficiency, let's call it, of operator bias. Do we have any insight yet as to how that initiative is helping?
Good question. I'm the right person to ask since I worked on that initiative. So the Imbalance Conformance Enhancements Initiative, which we worked on the policy last year, and we had the enhancement go in this spring, I believe, was actually a tweak to what we call the Imbalance Conformance Limiter, and that just triggers if our operators are biasing too heavily and may not accurately represent system conditions. So the enhancement we did to date is actually just an adjustment to the algorithm, so it's appropriately triggering or not triggering. The process changes you may have hinted at have not yet gone into place. The second part of that initiative was to develop better tools for the operators to be able to bias more consistently and accurately, and that is being worked on but is not implemented yet.
Okay. The next question I have, these are two, if I get two related. On the process of the RA, I'm a little concerned just conceptually about why you'd be removing the must-offer obligation in the real time for RA resources that don't have this imbalance award. It seems sort of counterintuitive to me that you'd want to remove that those additional resources that having that must-offer obligation. Now, certainly having an imbalance, if I understand the proposal right, having the imbalance reserve would initiate a must-offer obligation, but why would you cut yourself off of other resources that could also bid? That one just doesn't make sense.
It's a good question. I'm actually, if you don't mind, that's a very important point and I want to talk about it, but we have that coming up in the policy alignment. Would you mind holding that question and we can have that discussion when we get there?
No, that's perfectly reasonable. I'm sort of queuing these up. I'm hopeful that we're going to discuss this. And the last one, again, hopefully that we're going to discuss is on the imbalance reserves themselves. I'm a little concerned in, let's call it, topography changes into the real time, because we've seen in the past where the Kaito procures an ancillary service, for instance, in Northern California, where we get sudden path 15 congestion, and the reserve really isn't usable where it's necessary, say South Path. Are you foreseeing, zones or locational specific requirements for these buffers, or is it just going to be system specific?
Yes, good question, and that is not part of today's presentation, but we are working on deliverability. We're actually brainstorming a couple new methods that we haven't come out with yet, but we do need to make sure that in addition to a system requirement for imbalance reserves, that we're able to procure imbalance reserves. I'm just going to say zonally, but I'm using that very loosely, but within a specific location or region, so you have the ability to meet upward and downward uncertainty within a region, not just across the system in case you do have those topology changes.
Great. I'm really looking forward to that. And my last question, and again, this is queuing up possible future discussion, is have you given any thought to the settlement of this, the allocation of costs due to the returns? Is it just going to be, do you think, load ratio share? The uncertainty? The settlement, the allocation.
I'm sorry, you cut out there.
I'm giving the estimate of the cost, the allocation cost due to the imbalance reserves.
Josh, can you hear me okay? You broke up there, so can you repeat your last question?
Sure, let me try this again. So I guess my last question, again, this is probably queuing up something for future discussion, is on the settlement, the cost allocation of the imbalance reserves, whether that'll be strictly load ratio share or if there'll also be allocation to uncertainty as we currently have in flexible ramping.
So, Josh, in the technical documents that we posted for both approaches, there was a proposed cost allocation for each.
Correct. I just wanted to make sure now that we're refining the approach here that we're considering that and that's still the case. So, thank you.
Thanks, Josh. So, any other questions, Will?
Yeah, we currently have one more.
Okay.
Hi, Megan. It's Mark Holm with PowerX. Just two additional thoughts. I'm wondering if you could just back up to slide 6. So your imbalance reserves and the real-time must offer on the RA fleet. I know you want to save this for the next section or the policy development, which we're happy to do, but I just wanted to flag one piece, that in the integrated approach, the real-time must offer could be extended to all resources that are part of meeting the capacity constraint or reliability energy schedule, not just those that get imbalance reserve awards. I think one of the challenges we'd like to discuss further this afternoon is that when you have a sequential approach and you give imbalance reserves a real-time must offer, how effective is that if the rest of your physical resources that get day-ahead energy awards may include speculative supply, could just self-schedule down to zero, don't have a real-time must offer. And I think the real-time must offer, particularly associated with the RA fleet, both those that get physical energy awards and also imbalance reserves, is a really important topic that extends beyond this stakeholder process. I know it's been raised elsewhere as concerning with RA import supply. We share those concerns, and it's about getting that real-time must offer effective and efficient. So you're doing it in the right hours and you're doing it on the entire physical fleet that you're relying on. The second point I wanted to just make was on the day-ahead time frame versus the 6 hours out, a few additional points of consideration. One is that when the FRP was first developed in real time, as I recall, one of the reasons why we had a flexible ramping product and the predecessor, the flexible ramping constraint, was because the CAISO was witnessing in real time that resources that were fast ramping were often being dispatched for energy, and there wasn't enough headroom left later in the hour to have those fast ramping resources available. That same concept applies here. If your first procurement window is the IFM, you have the challenge of loading up your fast ramping resources with energy, very significantly reducing the fleet that's available to be awarded upward flexible ramping, which happens through exceptional dispatch, load biasing, et cetera. The second part of the day-ahead piece is that the rest of the West is already operating in a day-ahead market where most entities that have significant VARs aren't just relying on their VAR forecast at a P50 to meet their real-time load. They're actually doing a similar type action where they're setting aside, buying gas, committing the right amount of generation to have flexible reserves on standby in case solar or wind conditions or demand conditions change. And that is all occurring in that day-ahead time frame. So it really poses a challenge to do something but accomplish it in your first procurement window in the day-ahead time frame aligned with the practices in the rest of the West and prior to preloading resources with energy schedules and significantly reducing the fleet available to provide flexible reserves.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Mark. Any other questions in the queue?
There are currently no other questions in the queue.
Mike, did you have a question?
Yeah, just real quick. So on the last slide, you mentioned that the imbalance reserves will address granularity differences. Again, I didn't have too much time to look through the presentation, but I didn't think I saw anything about that.
Yeah, all we're saying is because the imbalance reserves are 15-minute ramp feasible, that we'll be able to move from one interval to the next.
But you still don't know where any resources will be dispatched on a 15-minute basis within an hour to really evaluate that, right?
So, Mike, this is George Angelovis. Hi, so. The idea is that when you determine the requirements for the imbalance reserve in the day-ahead market, you're looking at the potential uncertainty from going from the hourly day-ahead schedule to the worst 15-minute demand forecast and uncertainty that may materialize. So you're actually covering a part of the granularity going from the day ahead to FMM. So it's a matter of how you're going to calculate the requirements for the imbalance reserve product.
Paul Grivick, PG&E. You're touching on something I wanted to ask later, and that was your analysis seems to be indicating you're looking at the change in net load in the day ahead to the net load in FMM. And my impression of your analysis was you're looking at the hourly load in FMM, not the worst 15-minute interval. So I was going to ask, where are you getting the granularity if you're looking at the uncertainty from hour to hour in day ahead and FMM?
Yeah, it's a good question, Paul. Let's save that question for the portion of the presentation that will go over the results because the person that conducted the results will be able to answer that question.
Yeah, like I was saying, I was waiting for it until you all of a sudden said that, and then I was saying, okay, I wanted to raise it to say I do have a question on what you said. Thanks.
Okay, I think we should move forward.
Okay, I know everyone's been eagerly awaiting this. My manager, Brad Cooper, has been on me for about a month, but we're finally here. We have something to show you, policy alignment. We have 3 major initiatives that we're working on. 2 are in the works right now. 1 is upcoming, and they all interrelate and correlate. And so our teams have been working diligently together. We have an internal team that's making sure we understand the impacts of one to the other to make sure as we're developing policy that it's cohesive across all 3 of these initiatives. So as it's planned today, the CAISO is planning to implement our resource adequacy enhancements, our day-ahead market enhancements, and our extending of the day-ahead market to EIM all at the same time in the fall of 2021. So anticipating that simultaneous implementation dates, we want to make sure our policy development is aligned. So that's what this overview is. So first, I've got a description of what each of these are. We also are very aware and understanding of the fact or sympathetic to you all might not be following all of these, and that's okay. So if you're only following the day-ahead market enhancements, we want to make sure you understand the high-level overview of what's going on in resource adequacy enhancements and vice versa. So we will be using the same slide deck for RA enhancements as well during their next working group meeting, so we have alignment between all of our working groups. So resource adequacy at its whole, not necessarily the enhancement and initiative that's going on now, but resource adequacy in general, serves the purpose of ensuring that we have forward procurement of capacity to make adequate supply available and bid into the CAISO markets. If we don't have adequate bids, we can't position our fleet in the day ahead or the real time. So resource adequacy ensures you have those bids and the capacity that you need to meet load that would materialize. The RA Enhancements Initiative specifically is working on aligning the RA enhancements with the transforming nature of our grid. So how do we establish our requirements? Are they still accurate and appropriate? Do we need to change them? What has evolved on the grid? And is our RA paradigm still consistent with what we have going on in the grid? So at your 30,000-foot level, that's what's going on in RA enhancements. The day-ahead market, at its core, the purpose of the day-ahead market is to co-optimize energy and ancillary services to meet daily load and reliability requirements. So we have our RA fleet, they bid into the day-ahead market. The purpose of the day-ahead market is to position us, today Energy and AS, so we can serve our needs in real time. The day-ahead market enhancements, which you are all participating in, is introducing imbalance reserves so we can meet the potential ramping uncertainty in the upward and downward direction and appropriately compensate resources for their ability to be able to move up or down in real time. Regional markets in general, now we're expanding to the energy imbalance market. So a regional market paradigm allows multiple entities to share resources and different products across a larger footprint. And this allows us to capture diversity and efficiency benefits. So a market that's running for a larger area is able to find ways to serve load at a cheaper cost and dispatch generation when efficient. And today we do this in the real time in the energy imbalance market. We'd like to extend that to the day-ahead market as well. So the extending of the day-ahead market to the EIM, and we have a caveat here, if commenced, we're still awaiting the results of the feasibility study. Is that the right name for it? Yes. Feasibility assessment. So if we proceed with this, we will develop provisions to allow participation through the EIM, not just in our real-time market, but also in our day-ahead market. And recognizing in the construct of a day-ahead market that extends to the EIM that different balancing authority areas use different means to set their fleet up in the day-ahead. The CAISO uses our RA to set up in the day-ahead, but other balancing authority areas have different ways of getting bids or schedules from their day-ahead into the real time. So we need to have a cohesive day-ahead market that allows for these different types of pre-scheduling paradigms and procurement paradigms. So that's our very high-level overview. And you'll notice I'm really proud of this graphic. It starts and then it extends. They all interrelate. So this next slide is RA enhancements and the day-ahead market enhancements. So if you ever want to know what we're talking about, top little picture on the right. So RA enhancements and the DAME relationship. This is what we're proposing going forward, that our resource adequacy will establish our requirements to bid and self-schedule into the day-ahead market. So you have to have bids into the day-ahead market for the day-ahead market to be able to churn and spit out its results. After it comes up with the results, the Day-Ahead Market Enhancements Initiative would propose to introduce a real-time must-offer obligation for anything that's awarded imbalance reserves. And we believe this is replacing the need for the resource adequacy real-time must-offer obligation. And we think this is appropriate because imbalance reserves are covering the incremental cost of making this capacity available on a daily basis into the real-time market. If costs change, you can reflect that cost in your imbalance reserve bid, and we can set the imbalance reserve requirement daily or seasonally or hourly based on the needs of the grid for that day. So RA is setting you up into the day-ahead market. The day-ahead market is churning. It's coming up with results based on what we're anticipating for tomorrow, and that's creating your real-time must-offer obligation. So this is a paradigm shift from what we're doing today, but we believe it's introducing efficiencies and allowing generators to reflect their cost to be available for dispatch and incremental and decremental changes from the day-ahead to the real-time market. So next, RA enhancements in EDAM. One of the primary objectives in making sure our extending of the day-ahead market to the EIM is successful, that we have to find a way to avoid what we have coined double counting of resources in both the EIM and in the RA procurement. So today, let's assume you had an import and one of our load-serving entities was procuring resource adequacy on an intertie, and you showed that intertie to meet the RA requirements. We have to ensure then that that intertie, that import, is counting towards the CAISO RA and is not necessarily counting towards that EIM balancing authority area passing the resource deficiency test. It can't count for both. You can't count on it as an EIM BAA for meeting your flexible needs or your resource needs in your own BA, and also be showing that to meet the CAISO resource adequacy requirements. If you're doing that, that is considered double counting, and we have to find a way to avoid that in order for EDAM to be successful. And we believe that the imbalance reserve will allow us to accomplish this by identifying a source BA when you're doing any of those intertie transactions. One of the other pieces of this is we will be able to remove Ruck availability bids, and as a reminder, the Ruck availability bid as it works today is any CAISO resource adequacy that is not scheduled into the integrated forward market is required to bid at $0 into the CAISO's residual unit commitment. The residual unit commitment is ensuring the CAISO can meet our forecasted need, and the $0 Ruck availability bid is the CAISO's way of ensuring that we prioritize resource adequacy first. However, as we're moving into the EDAM paradigm, if we required CAISO resource adequacy to bid in at $0, and then we let this massive day-ahead market across the whole footprint come up with its best solution, of course it's going to pick the $0 bid first, right? So in that case, CAISO resource adequacy at $0 would always be prioritized to meet the needs of everybody else. So we have to find a way to remove the $0 Ruck availability bid and replace that instead with the imbalance reserves at a bid that reflects the cost for that particular generator. And then this would allow us to efficiently schedule energy and imbalance reserves across the entire EDAM footprint. So finally, we make it to the day-ahead market enhancements and the EDAM relationship. So really the benefit of EDAM is we're allowing multiple entities to meet and efficiently meet operational needs in others. So every balancing authority area has their way to meet uncertainty, has their way to meet changes in system conditions. Back 5 years ago, we were scheduling hourly, we were exceptionally dispatching. We've moved forward in the real time to a 5-minute dispatch using the CAISO market to find regional benefits across the entire footprint. Now we want to extend that into the day ahead, and also recognizing that balancing authority areas can trade the obligation to carry this ability to move up or move down. So if you're a balancing authority area that has flexibility, that has generation that can move and respond to changes in load, can meet uncertainty needs, you can bid that into the day-ahead market and actually meet the obligation for another balancing authority area. So we're allowing the transfer of imbalance, so you can meet your own imbalance needs, or those can be met by another balancing authority area. And that's all done through this co-optimized day-ahead market across the wire footprint. And so the reason the imbalance reserves are a key element to this is the imbalance reserves is establishing the requirement for the resource efficiency test. So on our next slide, you'll see that the day-ahead resource efficiency test is the evaluation that's determining whether a balancing authority area can meet their own needs prior to participating in the day-ahead market, very similar to how the real-time resource efficiency test works prior to the CAISO's real-time market. I think we hit everything on that side. I'm a picture person, so here's our picture. This walks through the flow of the correlation of all of these three initiatives in alignment with how they would work with our existing market structure. So if we look at the left side of this picture, you see the forward capacity procurement. So CAISO, again, uses our resource adequacy paradigm in order to ensure that we always have adequate bids into our markets. Other balancing authority areas may have other paradigms that they use to ensure capacity is available into their system to meet their operational needs. So CAISO has resource adequacy within the EDAM paradigm. There will be the integrated resource plan, so whatever the balancing authority area needs to get bids into the market. So you'll have the voluntary bids, recognizing here that the CAISO still maintains the RA day-ahead must-offer obligation. All of those bids will filter in the EDAM resource efficiency evaluation. So the resource efficiency evaluation will be checking to make sure you can balance, checking to make sure you can ramp, checking to make sure you're not exceeding any constraints or transmission limits, and checking to make sure you have imbalance reserves in the upward or the downward direction to meet your potential uncertainty needs. So if you pass the EDAM test, then you get to participate in the CAISO day-ahead market across the entire EDAM footprint, where we will co-optimize through a market solution the products of energy, ancillary services, and imbalance reserves. Important to note here that within the EDAM initiative, if you failed, we would determine whether you don't participate for what period of time. The initial thought, and this is still up for development, but the initial thought is if you don't pass the EDAM or day-ahead resource efficiency evaluation, that's similar to in real don't pass, your transfers would be limited to the value of the prior hour where you did pass. So then we have our day-ahead market products. After the day-ahead market co-optimized, we have the real-time must-offer obligation for anything that's awarded an imbalance reserve award. For any EIM entities that are not participating in the day-ahead market, real-time EIM entities will still be required to submit base schedules, and those are used as the foundation within the EIM real-time resource efficiency test. So what's really important to note here is this top day-ahead market products imbalance reserve real-time must-offer obligation. If you're participating in EDAM and you're going through the day-ahead market and you have imbalance reserve required to bid into the real-time market, you're always setting yourself up to pass the real-time resource efficiency evaluation. So that is one of the major benefits of EDAM. We're allowing the CAISO market and the CAISO day-ahead market structure to set all of the EIM entities up to be able to meet the real-time needs. And this imbalance reserve product will enable EIM balancing authority areas to be set up in the real-time as well, therefore passing the real-time resource efficiency test and being able to fully participate in the real-time market as well. And then finally, we hit our real-time market products, which is our co-optimization, again, across the entire EIM footprint of energy, ancillary services, and the real-time flexible ramping product. With that, you have your policy vision. Any questions in the room first? Go ahead, Dan.
Hey, Megan. Dan Williams from Customized Energy Solutions. I just can't let it pass without saying thank you for putting this together. As a picture person, this slide is great. And I just, to be a glutton for asking for what you want is I'd love to see the CAISO do this more and continue this out, as we look at other initiatives that are going to be going on in this 2019 to 2021 time horizon to just continue to kind of align and discuss how those initiatives are complementary to this vision as we work through each or in the catalog roadmap process, those sorts of things. So thank you for doing this.
Absolutely. And considering you mentioned that we work very closely, too close sometimes, we sit next to each other. It can be a challenging place upstairs for the CAISO policy team. But if there are initiatives that see an impact and there's questions on the correlation or the relationships between some of our initiatives that aren't mentioned in others, please bring that up to us. Greg had heard this. That's why he tasked our team with working on this. I think it has been beneficial, and I appreciate that you recognize that. So if you see any ideas or room for improvement, please let us know.
Will, are there any questions on the phone?
There's currently one question in the queue.
Hi, Megan. It's Mark Hummel with PowerX. I had two different topics to touch on here. I'm wondering if you could just back up to your RA slide, slide 13. So I think just talking about RA, so really appreciate some of the work that's been done here and the relationship between them. But I do want to flag here, this is a really important point, is that an EDAM is a far bigger initiative than an EIM. Day-ahead market obviously transact much larger volume than an energy imbalance market. I think the link between these is important. I think you flagged the need to avoid double counting, which we agree with, that you want to make sure that if someone has committed RA to the CAISO BAA from another BAA, that is not counting towards whatever comes out of an EDAM or even EIM resource sufficiency test. But I think there's a second related issue, which is the rest of the West operates on a day-ahead firm energy market with day-ahead E-tags. And the CAISO, we really appreciate the transparency of the CAISO, the support of the CPUC and what DMM has put out on identifying the gaps in the CAISO's RA program. And I know you're trying to address a lot of those gaps in RA enhancements as well as in the CPUC proceedings, but there really is quite a sizable gap. And that includes the speculative supply that comes in on the interties that's not real. It includes a variety of RA resources that are not performing at their RA level. And the EDAM can kind of cascade reliability risk across the footprint if we don't address those gaps. In particular, other entities in the region, if an EDAM gets off the ground, will be decommitting their units day ahead because they may have transfers from the CAISO. And if the CAISO supply stack is not 100% physical, or we're able to identify the full physical supply and can't separate that out from virtual and speculative supply and supply that's not going to perform, it can expand the reliability risk. So I think there needs to be an added point here, which it's not just about the need to avoid double counting of resources in any EDAM resource sufficiency evaluation, but it's the need to ensure that all resources in the resource sufficiency evaluation are physical and capable of performing. And I think that is particularly applicable to everyone, but particularly to the CAISO, given the challenges you've experienced, acknowledged, and are trying to address. So that's kind of one issue we wanted to highlight. There is a second one, which I think is a higher level issue, which is I think there's been great work to date in this stakeholder process. I think this is a great set of slides to further the dialogue, but I do have concerns that when an EDAM launches, if it's not already announced as launching a stakeholder process, I have concerns about this stakeholder process. In particular, should this stakeholder process come to an end and there be a separate stream underneath the EDAM stakeholder process associated with these topics, because otherwise there is kind of stakeholder governance concerns. There are numerous EIM entities and their regulators that aren't even aware of this call today, aren't following this stakeholder process. An EDAM stakeholder process hasn't yet begun And even though the dialogue's been great, I think we need to do a pivot here because it feels like we're starting to go down the road of pre-baking or predetermining the design of an EDAM before an EDAM stakeholder process even begins. And that's not meant in any way to be criticism, because I think the work here was great to date, but I think once the decision is made that an EDAM stakeholder process commences, I think it's challenging to have a separate stakeholder process where it's largely determined some of the core design elements feeding into the EDAM stakeholder process. The EDAM stakeholder process really needs to be a true regional stakeholder process without predetermining key design issues. And so I think the pivot is going to be important here because I know there are numerous entities that care about these issues that are EM entities that may not even be on the call today, as well as other entities that may consider joining an EDAM that don't realize that what's happening here may feed into an EDAM. And so again, request that the CAISO, including senior management, think about whether this stakeholder process should come to an end and be relaunched underneath the EDAM stakeholder process framework.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. We definitely hear you. We'll take that to senior management, but I think actually part of that is why we have tried not to develop more. I mean, even to your point of speculative bidding on the interties and needing to ensure that that's physical supply, we could come up with some type of e-tagging rule, but we don't want to develop that yet until we start the EDAM process and understand the loop correlation with the day-ahead market enhancements. And the direction we've gotten to date is to wait for the Greg, what do we call it? Feasibility assessment. Do you want to mention anything, Greg? Or?
Yeah, I mean, just a couple comments. I think we have been, quite clear in the past, particularly through the roadmap process, that we did anticipate that. Well, first, let me start with the primary motivation for the day-ahead market enhancements, as I said earlier, is reliability needs of the ISO. It's really making sure that we're setting up resources in advance so that we can meet those uncertainty needs between day-ahead and real-time. So we need that regardless of whether EDAM goes forward or not. That being said, we've also been, we've tried to be quite clear that anybody that's interested in EDAM should also be following this stakeholder process as well and providing their input as we go along. That being said, I'm sure if we do move forward with EDAM, at that time, we would be looking at if additional interactions come up and be, open to policy modifications at that point. I mean, these are currently scheduled to be implemented concurrently, so the designs, I think, which we've been trying to stress today, obviously need to be well coordinated and work well together. So, I do hear the concern, but again, I think we need to continue moving forward on this because whether EDAM goes forward or not, we believe these enhancements for the day-ahead market are necessary.
I appreciate that, Greg, and I'm not intending to criticize what has happened to date. What I'm really saying is that we feel that you need to move this along, but as soon as an EDAM stakeholder process is launched, which I understand Steve Burbridge largely announced that they intend to move forward, that running this as a separate track is not the best way forward. So it's really a go-forward comment that we think it's time for a pivot, that as an EDAM stakeholder process is launched, this should be underneath the EDAM banner. Again, it's not a criticism of the work to date or the direction you had to go for the CAISO BAA's reliability. We've largely supported the work in the initiative. We're just concerned that this becomes determinant of a Western day-ahead market, and a lot of the core design elements happen here. And if an EDAM launches, it really needs to be a true regional effort, not just extending what is decided in CAISO stakeholder processes to a regional market. And I think that's an important pivot that needs to occur.
This is Terry Bentley with the Western Power Trading Forum. I was wondering if you could comment a little bit to Mark's point, I guess, on how the current elements of the proposal would pivot under EDAM, because I was under the, I guess, agreement with Greg that, for example, the Imbalance product seemed to be needed purely for ISO reliability, and you can move forward with that no matter what. But I don't know that much about EIM. Callie's our expert, and it seems to me that maybe there is a connection between, for example, the flex sufficiency assessment in the EIM and the Imbalance product. And then with Ruck availability bids, there definitely seems to be a connection there between whether you structure the proposal as you have it here compared to other maybe more workable structures for EIM that haven't even been considered yet. So until I think you actually map your elements to what it would look like under EDAM, I don't quite understand how you could even keep it under a single umbrella and then pivot. That doesn't really make sense to me at all.
Well, yeah, and I appreciate that. And I think if you go back to Megan's picture, it's trying to show what all of the interrelationships among the various initiatives are. So, none of these are being done in a silo. They're all being, to me, they should all be looked at as one cohesive policy going forward. So, our intent is not to be doing any of these as separate processes. If EDAM takes off and starts to move forward, clearly we'll consider, the best way it sounds like it's more of a process concern going forward as to how we would handle that. But, I don't think we're trying to argue at all that there aren't these clear interrelationships between the two policies that, need to be addressed as we move forward. And so there probably are, process, I'll call them efficiencies or whatever, to try and make it, more, it sounds like people don't view this process as outreaching enough, but, we'll look into that and try and see what we would do differently going forward. But, I'm not by any means trying to say that these are independent processes.
I don't think you're not outreaching enough. I think your ISO is very outreaching and inclusive to all stakeholders, including EIM entities. My point was more about the design. I think it's different designs, whether you go forward with EDAM or not, and it seems like you need a drop-dead date to say, well, EDAM may be delayed, but we really need this imbalance product. I think your data really show that we clearly need an imbalance product. And so maybe you do move forward with that. It's just hard, I think, to keep waiting. When is the pivot? Are you just at some point going to say we need this to move forward no matter what?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's why we're continuing to, move forward at this point, because we don't want the window to close. We are trying to meet a fall 2021 implementation date, and we think it's necessary. And again, the primary driver here is reliability needs that we're looking at moving forward. So that's why we're continuing to push on with the day-ahead market enhancements. We're ready to get moving on EDAM as soon as we get the signal, but we haven't seen it yet. So as soon as that comes, if it comes, we're ready to go.
Just to be clear, I think it's both parts, Greg. I think it's the process pivot so that we don't have entities that are not on these calls and they're tracking and their individual stakeholders are tracking better if it's underneath the EDAM broader umbrella once when it's the appropriate time. Perhaps it's now to make that pivot. But I think it's kind of to Carrie's point too. There may be different considerations. One good example is the CAISO today. We've been talking about this so far this morning in the context of the CAISO BAA. And the trade-offs of using load bias, exceptional dispatch, and Ruck net short versus procuring an imbalance reserve product, that's a different dialogue when you talk about it applying to a voluntary market. As an example, if virtual supply and virtual demand determine the unit commitment, so it's basically speculation, or financials determine the unit commitment, RTOs might not be that worried about that, because they have effectively captive generators that they can exceptionally dispatch if they don't like that market solution. But when you apply that to an EDAM, other entities, if they miss their day-ahead window to commit gas and commit the right units, and now you're in a voluntary market and the exceptional dispatch is not generators within an RTO footprint, it can have very different ramifications as to whether an exceptional dispatch approach is even workable versus getting it right in the first place and having a physical binding day-ahead commitment with the right amount, not too much and not too little imbalance reserve. So again, just listening to the dialogue this morning, and we've been thinking about this in the context of the CAISO BAA, I think that dialogue shifts considerably when you start talking about that in the context of West-wide and what the practices are elsewhere. And I know you're trying to recognize that, but again, I think we can't just start from the CAISO BAA and think we're just going to extend that to the rest of the West. We really need to take a step back and consider the different interests, priorities, and circumstances across the West, including but not limited to the CAISO BAA.
Great, thank you, Mark. All right, that's it for the phone. Anybody else in the room have a question?
This is Michael Colvin again from with EDF. I very much, appreciate the vision of seeing this and kind of seeing it laid out. I guess the question I have is sort of what metrics are we using to make certain that we're actually reaching the design that we're looking for? And I don't really see it kind of spelled out. I'm sort of, specifically for this slide, that middle column when we talk about energy ancillary services and balance reserves. I think there's a lot more metrics to make certain that we actually have a functional day-ahead market product. And so I don't think we've talked about that yet. I don't know if this is the time, if we want to talk about it later, but I just wanted to sort of flag that.
Yeah, I can speak to it briefly, and Greg, chime in here if you want to. But I think off the top of my head, I can think of two metrics. So one, which I think is more prevalent, is the EIM diversity benefit. So right now we run the diversity benefit for the real-time EIM, and under an EDAM paradigm, we would also run a day-ahead diversity benefit. So that, I think, would be a metric. In addition to that, I think, now I'm backtracking. I was thinking we could calculate how much uncertainty materialized, because that's our metric now, but that wouldn't work going forward because we would have the imbalance reserves, which would serve that need. So that's, I don't know. That's a good thing to think about. I don't know, maybe even a comparison of, I'm just off the whim here, so hopefully I don't get myself in trouble, but the amount of biasing that's needed or the amount of exceptional dispatch that's needed, because if we're able to reduce those amounts and we're getting those into a market, we're getting a more efficient solution and still ensuring that our operator reliability needs are met, which is, in my mind, the big objective.
Right.
Meet reliability needs and do it efficiently.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go. I think the primary metric here is that what's really identified the need that we need some type of change is that we're seeing increasing amounts of out-of-market operator actions that are required to keep the grid reliable. And, clearly we're trying, the way the ISO's, our original mission statement was reliability through markets, not reliability through out-of-market operator actions. So we're trying, as much as possible, get that reliability through the markets. We think it's a more efficient approach and way to do it. That's really a lot of the value added that the ISO provides, so that's what we're trying to do. So, I think we'll know we're successful if we can do a design that really does minimize the need for those out-of-market operator actions so that we are, both efficiently valuing both capacity and energy as we go forward.
I think that makes a ton of sense, and I look forward to hopefully seeing that written down somewhere later on. But I would also encourage you, as you're sort of thinking about the development and kind of what success looks like, to also think about, well, going back to kind of first principles, are we actually, getting as many clean resources onto the system integrated as reasonably as possible? Are we, how many additional GHGs are we displacing, if at all? Things like that. And these are metrics that we're using in the EIM context. So I think, as we're going back to our conversation a few minutes ago, as these two are starting to converge, I think using those metrics as well in this context would be really helpful.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's been a while, but
to the extent that they're applicable.
Yeah, no, I agree. I like the idea of what does success look like. During one of our original DAME papers, so the design has changed, it's developed, we've moved on, but it was probably a year ago when we published a paper, and I started by tying it to our corporate and regional goals. So even higher level than what we've been talking about today, but how is this needed in order to meet, integration of renewables, and what does that look like? So we'll be publishing a paper, hopefully after this working group meeting, and I think that's a great idea for the paper. So thank you.
Hey, this is Mike Castellano, Energy Division of the CPUC. Just a quick response to what Greg was saying. I agree that reducing out-of-market operations or out-of-market adjustments, or whatever you want to call it, could represent efficiency. But, what we've seen and what we kind of know is that operators, and as Megan said, operators plan for the, worst-case scenario. And I'm sure, if we look at the data that you guys have coming up later, it shows that the operators tend to push things up. If what this accomplishes is eliminating exceptional dispatch by committing, an extra 2,000 megawatts of resources every day, that's not necessarily an efficient or by paying money, capacity money or whatever, to 2,000 megawatts of resources every hour, every day. That's not necessarily an efficient solution. You can still be overpaying and not necessarily resulting in out-of-market actions.
So today we have the real-time must-offer obligation for RA, right? So there still are costs associated with getting bids into the real-time market. So all we're saying is this imbalance reserve product. Today our operators may be overbiasing unnecessarily, and that could be costly and not worth it either. So all we're saying is let's find a product to meet the operational needs and try to do it efficiently. And there are efficiencies in creating energy schedules, not necessarily an additional 2,000 megawatts of commitment, but just reflecting the cost that it would cost to make sure that resource is available to move up or down as we move to real time.
Right, but just eliminating exceptional dispatch, if you're doing that by sort of pushing the forecast up, if you're pushing the whole day-ahead market up on a regular basis instead of just doing it in Ruck, then you could eliminate a lot of the operator out-of-market actions, but you're not necessarily coming to a better solution in the market than you have right now. You're increasing costs without necessarily getting anything out of it.
Well,
so Mike, I think the issue is that in a day-ahead time frame today, we don't position resources so that they have ramp capability to address the uncertainty that materializes. But now putting in an imbalance reserve product in the day-ahead time frame, you now have resources with an energy schedule and an imbalance reserve schedule such that they can now respond via an economic bid. If we didn't have an imbalance reserve product, we may schedule all of our fast resources at PMAX, and basically all you have is down capability, but you don't have any up. And so this now will allow us to do that in the day-ahead time frame.
Yeah, I'm not arguing with that, Don. I'm saying that when we were just talking about measures of success, how we evaluate whether this actually works, Greg said eliminating exceptional dispatch, decreasing exceptional dispatch and out-of-market actions was the measure of success. And I'm saying that's one part of it. We can decrease exceptional dispatch and out-of-market actions by overcommitting a lot of stuff or overpaying for capacity to be ready to be dispatched on a regular basis. That doesn't necessarily mean that the market is in a better place than it is now, because buying too much capacity, having too much capacity ready to respond is not necessarily better than what we have now. We can really push up costs a lot without improving reliability as much as we're increasing costs. I'm just saying we have to take both of those things into account.
Well, sure. I mean, don't take it too literally. I mean, we're not trying to get exceptional dispatches and out-of-market operator actions to zero at any cost. It's really a balance. We're trying to, which is why we'll get to the data analysis later. There's a lot of ways that we can look at, what's been occurring historically so that we can procure, an efficient amount of this that, will cover the vast majority of the operational needs that we would see between day-ahead and real-time without having to commit, potentially thousands of extra megawatts of capacity. We have that. That's just an issue with how you're setting up capacity requirements. We have a 6% operating reserve requirement. Well, a lot of times that's probably way higher than we need, but that's what's been established, as NERC reliability requirements. We'll be looking at what we need for reliability, what we believe is necessary to maintain reliable grid operations and not buy more than that. But at the same time, I think, the point we're trying to make today is we're not even close to that today. We need something in the day-ahead market to get us closer because the out-of-market actions that the operators are having to take is increasing at a fairly rapid pace, and we're at thousands of megawatts of that today. So, to say there's nothing that needs to be done, I think is, not true.
Okay, so we'll take one more question.
Oh, sorry. I have not said that there's nothing that needs to be done. I was just saying we need to consider cost as well.
Okay, so one more question, then we're going to move on. So go ahead, Carrie.
This is Carrie Bentley with the Western Power Trading Forum. So I also concur metrics for success would be great, but I know my metrics for success are very different than anything that's been mentioned. You talk about reliability through markets, which is a phrase I throw around all the time in these stakeholder meetings, but here you're fundamentally changing the market in your day-ahead proposal and option 2. So things like, what is the role of a nodal day-ahead LMP? What is the role of virtuals? What is the role of CRRs? all of those need to be discussed. And then going back to Mark's point, I actually think the role of these different elements are probably different if you just have an internal market compared to one that's extended to the EIM entities. And this is where it gets back to the market design. I don't know if I can even evaluate whether WPTF agrees with the market design without knowing whether it's being extended. But radical changes like these, I absolutely believe need metrics, but I think we need to talk about what those metrics are a little bit more, because a market needs both supply and demand, and if you're only talking about, efficient dispatch and reliability, you're missing the whole pricing aspect of a market, and market relies on prices.
Oh, you're teeing Dawn up perfectly. So this afternoon, Dawn will be leading our comparison discussion. We've pointed out some of what we see as the benefits and potential downsides of both of the alternatives we propose. We really want to have a good discussion about it, and part of what Dawn will be discussing is really what is the role of the day-ahead market. What is the role of the integrated forward market and the residual unit commitment as we use them today, and what's appropriate in determining how much we schedule and at what price. All right, so we'll get through as much of this as we can before lunch. And I will preface that this is an overview. So we are intentionally keeping this high level right now, understanding that the nuances and intricacies will be developed as we continue forward. And Dawn will be leading that discussion after lunch as well. So we really wanted to do this to level set so everybody understands where we're at and the differences between our two proposals. So based on the comments we received, it did seem that there was some confusion, and we take partial fault because the naming convention that we came forward with last time I think was very confusing and misleading. So at our last meeting we said we had a sequential option and an integrated option. We did not talk about the name co-optimized in either name for those options. In reality, it's very important to recognize that option one, which we're now rebranding as the financial option, is a co-optimization of products. So we had a lot of stakeholders in support of option two, which we're now naming the financial and plus forecast option. And while that's fine, we really are looking for support of the rationale and the reasoning behind why you are supporting one option over the other. And admittedly, the majority of the comments that came in support of option two said they were in support of a co-optimization of energy and capacity products. We'd like to point out now both options do that. Option one will co-optimize energy, ancillary services, and imbalance reserves, our capacity products. Option two also co-optimizes our products. They're just doing it based on a different target. And there are impacts that come with the pricing of virtuals and the pricing of non-dispatchable generation based on these two options. So these next couple slides are, again, high-level overview. We'll be explaining our status quo, which truly is a sequential two market runs. So we'll explain status quo, how that works, and then I'll do a high-level overview of option one, the financial option, which is co-optimizing our products based on bid-in demand. And then we'll give an overview of option two, the financial plus forecast option, which is also a co-optimization of products based on bid-in demand and the CAISO forecast. So both of our formulations will be co-optimizing the procurement of energy and capacity products. That's our major takeaway here. So I'm going to run through this really briefly. We actually have this slide in here twice, more just for your reference as you're going back through the material after today's meeting. This is an overview of status quo option one and option two, but we'll be hitting all of these elements in the upcoming slides, and then this slide is also duplicated at the beginning of Dawn's section. So high-level takeaways here, status quo is the integrated forward market, which is co-optimizing bid-in demand and AS. That's followed by our residual unit commitment, which is an additional capacity procurement to meet the CAISO forecast. We will ED if necessary, if where those markets clear are not consistent with our operational needs. Option one will be co-optimizing our products, but based on bid-in demand. Option two will be co-optimizing products based on the bid-in demand and the CAISO forecast. Also important to note here, we had some comments about, we called it the Reliability and Deliverability Assessment Tool. That would apply under either option 1 or option 2. All that would be doing is ensuring our operators can efficiently and accurately exceptionally dispatch if the arise needs. So the need for the operator to exceptionally dispatch will always exist. Do we think it will be minimized? Yes, but it will always exist under either of these options. So status quo, this should all be reviewed. Who wants to present? You all know this, right? So status quo, we start with our integrated forward market where we commit supply based on bid and demand, and we also procure ancillary services as our contingency reserves. One of the benefits of the way this is done today is the integrated forward market does allow our load-serving entities to establish a financial position in the day-ahead market. They can determine how much they want to hedge in the day-ahead market and how much they want to leave up for potential changes in real time. Load-serving entities take a financial position. That's a very important element of the way the day-ahead market works today and the purpose of what the day-ahead market is today. So we can determine we want to maintain that or we can move away from that, but that's how it's done today. Following the integrated forward market is the residual unit commitment, commonly called Ruck, and this is the additional commitment of capacity using those Ruck availability bids we've already mentioned, which are RA Resources obligatory $0 bid into our secondary market run to ensure that at all times we can meet the CAISO forecast should it differ from the integrated forward market. We've discussed this previously. The residual unit commitment only commits in the upward direction. It does not have the ability to decommit or decrement schedules. Finally, following these sequential market runs is the exceptional dispatch if needed for operators to commit or schedule additional energy, specifically energy for reliability purposes. So Dan, you'll like these pictures too. I'm a picture person, gotta have the pictures. So step 1, the integrated forward market for our status quo is to clear bid and demand to supply. Step 2 is your residual unit commitment. We're committing additional capacity to meet the CAISO forecast plus any operator adjustments. However, based on our data we've looked at, there's uncertainty that can materialize, and this green envelope can be pretty big. So we might need to move off that day-ahead position upward or downward in pretty large quantities. And the way we're doing this sequential run today does not necessarily ensure we can meet our uncertainty envelope. So even if our operators did use an adjustment in the CAISO forecast to get additional capacity through the Ruck process, we might have to exceptionally dispatch following the close of the day-ahead market to ensure we can meet that upward bound of the uncertainty envelope. So that's status quo. Next is our proposal for option 1, the financial option, and option 2, the financial plus forecast option. Very important to note that both of these options do co-optimize energy and capacity products. So we're resulting in market efficiencies, and we can adequately and appropriately compensate resources to be available for dispatch in real time in the upward or downward direction to meet uncertainty. The imbalance reserve product in both options addresses our operational needs, and we believe it does eliminate the need to have a sequential Ruck process like is done today. And our anticipation is either of these designs will reduce the need for out-of-market actions, including those load adjustments, informally known as biasing, or our exceptional dispatches in the day-ahead time frame. So this is a comparison side by side of each of these, and then I'm going to walk through them one at a time. But our uncertainty envelope in these scenarios is staying the same. So our upward target and our downward target is the same target. And the way we define that uncertainty envelope, those target points, is going to be driven partially off of the data analysis we'll present later this afternoon. So in the financial option, option 1, on the left, we have our cleared bid and supply, and we need uncertainty imbalance reserve to meet our uncertainty up needs in the upward direction and potential uncertainty down so we can meet both bounds of the uncertainty envelope. The second half of that diagram is admittedly simplified, but in general, we're working off of the CAISO forecast to meet uncertainty up and uncertainty down. That also will have the reliability capacity product in there as well, which we'll discuss in the next slide. But this is a very high-level overview if you wanted a comparison of two options. So the financial and forecast are both single co-optimized market runs. They're procuring imbalance reserves to ensure we can meet 15-minute needs. The financial option is clearing based on bid and demand, whereas imbalance reserves in both cases are, is that a typo? Sorry, hold please. All right, you guys, I can't tell you how many times I proofread this presentation. Of course, I have a typo. It should, under the financial plus forecast, say imbalance reserves are procured relative to the CAISO forecast. Womp womp. I will make that change and we'll re-upload this. But the imbalance reserves and financial option will be procured to bid and demand, and the financial plus forecast will be procured relative to the CAISO
Megan,
forecast.
It's perhaps an obscure detail, but if someone look at the technical appendix that we released in the formulation of the financial and forecast, actually the procurement of the balanced reserve is made to be feasible whether it's on top of the financial schedule or on the physical schedule. So it actually combines both effects. So it's like a hybrid. So it's not one or the other, it's both.
So it's only a half typo. Yeah. I think it helps with the pictures too. But our overview here is, in general, we are co-optimizing imbalance reserves with energy, with ancillary services under both approaches. One key note here is the addition of the reliability capacity under the financial plus forecast. So that would be an additional capacity product ensuring we can meet the difference between the integrated forward market and the CAISO, between the bid and demand and the CAISO forecast. And in doing that, we would ensure that that product is deliverable at a nodal location. So that does differ than the imbalance reserves, which are not necessarily deliverable, and we have to work through a delivery element to make sure the imbalance reserves are delivered where needed. One very important distinction, Don will talk about this more, is the impact of using the CAISO forecast and procuring this reliability capacity in the option 2 can result in different LMPs for physical and virtual supply. It's a very different paradigm. By putting the CAISO forecast into the day-ahead market run and then creating a product that we have to buy to meet the difference between the forecast and the cleared bid and demand is changing the element of allowing LSCs to determine their position and have differences between the LMP for virtuals and physical supply. Very similar element for our dispatchable and non-dispatchable generation, specifically VERS. If VERS are used to meet the reliability energy needs, that will not necessarily be done based on bids. It will be done based on the CAISO's forecast of the VERS, and that can result in different prices for dispatchable and non-dispatchable generation. So I just wanted to highlight that here, and that will be part of our discussion later this afternoon.
It's not really different prices between dispatchable and non-dispatchable. The key is that they're going to the extent that there's a difference between what they cleared via a bid and what our forecast is, they'll either be, if our forecast is higher than what they bid in, then they would be paid the reliability capacity up. And if it ended up that our forecast was lower than what cleared, they'd end up paying for the reliability capacity down.
Yeah, and let me add a little bit to that. So you see a different effective price, but the LMP for energy is the same for both physical and virtual resources. But if you take into account the additional settlement for reliability capacity and you see the effective price, then of course these are different because physical resources contribute to both, and therefore they get the marginal prices for both under the two different payments for energy and capacity. And this is not by any measure new. We have this also in the current market. You don't see it very clearly because we solve IFM and Ruck sequentially, but in essence, a physical resource will get a settlement for its financial energy from IFM, .LMP plus Ruck availability payment, which is not available to a virtual resource that only gets the financial. So there's nothing new here. It's just by combining FM and Ruck, you see this effect, but it's not really different than what you have in our market today. The only exception is by co-optimizing it, you have a more efficient outcome. I just want to throw that out.
Carrie Bentley with the Western Power Trading Forum. I actually had a different question, but George, a little bit, I just want to say we could talk about this a lot more after lunch. I'm not going to hold everyone up, but I really disagree with that characterization, right? I mean, the equivalent would be if you bid $30 for your energy and you might get paid that in your energy LMP and you might get paid a portion of that in Ruck. So we could argue about it after lunch. I just want to put it out there. I fundamentally disagree with that characterization.
Just really quick, the payment for capacity is not driven by the energy prices, the way you presented it. It's driven by the capacity prices, so it's really more... I
understand, but your energy offer, when you offer in a physical supply, you get paid the shadow price of both the... We can talk about this after lunch. I want to ask my question. So the deliverability piece, I'm confused because I thought earlier in the meeting you said that you were going to have a deliverability component of the imbalance, and I think that's a very important aspect. So can you just clarify?
Yes. So today in Ruck, we know that based on the Ruck run, the results of Ruck are transmission feasible. Like we can get the capacity exactly where we need it, more at a nodal level. So we do not yet have the ability to ensure imbalance reserves are deliverable at a nodal level. It's actually something we're talking about and considering and looking into. But if we were to use just a zonal approach, the imbalance reserves, you could meet your requirements within that zone, but not necessarily at a nodal level. Whereas the reliability capacity within option 2 actually can meet the needs at a nodal level.
Right, but I thought at the beginning of the meeting you said you were going to do deliverability for your real-time flexible ramping product and then port that over. Is that going to be a separate process, or is that within here?
It's a tangential process.
A tangential process, okay. All right, but it's not included in this description.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, did you still have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I agree with Carrie that this is a much bigger change to the market than is being portrayed right now. And, I think one interesting way to think about it is to look at it from the perspective of energy storage resources and how they could potentially be scheduled in a market where the price you get paid for generating is noticeably different than the price you get paid for, or the price you have to pay for consuming at the same time. But we can talk about that more later.
So with that, I do have 3 more slides, but it's noon, and I think it will be good to pick up with these 3 slides before we hit the data analysis. So I think we will break for lunch. So let's resume at 1 p.m., and hopefully you're all full and happy for a good discussion this afternoon. Eat protein. Thank you, guys.
So we'll be back in an hour.